Ed gave me hope as a topic for my talk, and that's quite difficult because unlike the scientists who are all talking about tangible things, hope is metaphysical. It's a difficult thing to pin down, and all too often I think it's really just blind optimism. My tutor, who some of you I think knew, a wonderful man called Michael Kidson, he used to say to his pupils, "Never say hopefully, it makes you sound like a football manager." And so, yes, you get, hopefully my team will not be relegated this season and I will not get the sack. Or, more topically, hopefully the Prime Minister will forget his manifesto commitment to ban trail hunting, overlook 20 years of cheerfully illegal not trail hunting, and not use the elected dictatorship given to him by a 148-seat majority to do so. For the next 4 years, as our politicos, I think were really saying earlier, I'm afraid it's hard to see much hope. I'm not being defeatist by pointing this out, just being realistic about the world as it is, not as we would wish it to be. But that's not to say there is no hope, on the contrary. And what I want to do today is analyse that hope and discuss how we can nurture it. I'm going to be deliberately provocative because I want to generate a debate and because I think we need to avoid groupthink, of which there has been far too much in the hunting community. So please bear with me. At the risk of sounding like a school chaplain, I'm going to break it down into 4 letters, H-O-P-E. So H is for history. And as we've been hearing, when I look at the history of hunting, stretching back to the earliest origins of our species, all those millennia ago, it seems inconceivable to me that something as utterly primal to the human condition as hunting can stay banned forever. Because history teaches us that many things have been banned only to be legalized later. The Victorians criminalized homosexuality, yet today it seems to be actively encouraged even in the church and the armed forces. Cromwell banned almost everything, including Christmas, but we can now see that the middle of the 17th century was, like now, just one of those ideological authoritarian spasms that all societies go through from time to time, and much of it came back with the joyful hedonism of the Restoration in 1660. The closest parallel I can find is prohibition in the United States. You may correct me. When a government gave in to special interest groups, where have we seen that before, and banned alcohol, something that is almost as central to most human cultures as hunting. As we know, the ban was widely ignored and there was mass civil disobedience. Where have we seen that before? And 13 years later, drinking alcohol was legalized, by then much enriched by cocktail culture. So looking back at history gives us hope. But what if we look forward? What will tomorrow's historians write about hunting if ChatGPT hasn't done away with them all? Here there are hopes and fears. I hope they will say that hunting was the first casualty of the culture wars, when after the Cold War ended, the Berlin Wall came down, communism utterly discredited, and Marxism simply morphed into other forms, and they attacked culture and divided people into hostile groups and made specious arguments in order to undermine society, because that's what Marxists do. And I hope they will say that the culture wars eventually ended, good triumphed in the end, and the ban was lifted. I fear they will be utterly bemused by the way the hunting community allowed the issue to be reduced down to an argument about whether we should be allowed to go not hunting chasing a sock filled with animal scent, or not hunting, filled with aniseed or a clean boot. It's the narcissism of small differences. Perhaps they will conclude that both sides acquiesced in this ridiculous proxy war because huntsmen were determined to keep their hounds entered to hunt fox scent as a way of keeping their options open in future. But the other side were equally determined, therefore, to ban it, and they will realize that no one was fooled. And I fear they may conclude that the seeds of defeat were sown when the campaign for hunting became the campaign for not hunting. And I suspect they will be utterly astonished that the official campaign gave up asserting that the hunting community did not accept the ban on natural hunting, seemingly against the wishes of the majority of hunting people. The anti-prohibition movements in the United States did not succeed by defending alcohol-free lager. I think our future historians will wonder why we identified trail hunting as the vital ground and dug our trenches to die on that particular hill, because they will see with the distance of history that it would simply boil down in the minds of overwhelmingly hostile legislators to a simple question: has trail hunting led to law breaking? And of course, there is a huge body of evidence that it has. Don't tell him, Pike. It's the don't tell him, Pike strategy. There are few more pro-hunting journalists writing in national newspapers than me, with the possible exceptions of Johnny and Charles Moore, who was here earlier. But even I would not insult my readers' intelligence by endorsing some of the claims of innocence now being made about trail hunting. H also stands for honesty, and we are harming our cause if we seize the low moral ground, the moral low ground, and don't acknowledge the truth. I think our future historians will ponder why we attempted to defend the indefensible instead of using the opportunity to make our arguments in defense of natural hunting to a new generation. The parliamentary defeat would probably be the same, but we could win a moral victory by highlighting the abuse of power and the persecution of a minority, and thereby sow the seeds for the restoration of the freedom to hunt in a future parliament. We could point out that the Act in 2004 would not have been possible if the Equality Act had then been in place, but it is now. And we might go into the next election with a narrative that there is a gaping wound in the countryside that must be healed, and hunting has been the victim of a terrible miscarriage of justice like the Birmingham 6 or the Guildford 4. Moral victories have always overturned parliamentary defeats in the end. On to O. O stands for Overton window. The Overton window, some of you will know, is the window within which it is possible to legislate because there is sufficient social acceptance of an issue. How often did we hear during the Blair-Brown years or during 14 years of Tory-led government when we might have done something about it? We don't want to talk about hunting, old boy, not within the Overton window. Of course, you can argue that keeping our heads down has served us well until now. But I would make 3 points about Overton windows. First, no successful human rights movement, and that is what we are, a human rights movement, ever achieved victory by bleating about Overton windows and parliamentary arithmetic. Did Martin Luther King say, "I have a dream that one day the Overton window will open my children will be able to argue that they should not be judged by the colour of their skin. Of course he didn't. Successful human rights movements were steadfast to their principles and never gave up fighting for their rights, however hopeless the situation. Secondly, no one is ever going to open the Overton window on hunting for us, except, probably, for a very brief moment, Starmer himself following Scotland, and I come from Scotland and I've seen it happening, by banning animal scent trail hunting while probably still allowing drag hunting, nailing down the coffin lid with all the authoritarian tools developed in Holyrood, such as strict and vicarious liability, before slamming the window shut again. Thirdly, if you give up defending natural hunting in order to defend trail hunting, there are two possibilities. Either you win a narrow technical victory, but have to concede the kind of things we now have in Scotland: monitors, tracker collars on hounds, meat locations being given by civil servants to the saboteurs, and so on. Or you lose and end up with drag hunting. Where on earth do you go from there? Surely it really would be very hard to open the Overton window again. P stands for prohibition, as you've heard, but also prejudice and persecution. Those of you who read my Scribe Hound column will know that I employ a young Afghan asylum seeker on my farm to mend dry stone walls. And Sadat and I were walking across the field the other day when a hare got up in front of us. And I said to him, "Do you have hares in Afghanistan?" And they do, apparently. And I said, do you have coursing there? I know that coursing is pretty much the national sport of Pakistan. And he said no. There are some people who want to do that, but the Taliban interpret the Quran in such a way that field sports are forbidden. And there was a coursing meeting, he didn't call it that. And the Taliban sent along a man in a vest, a suicide bomber who blew them all up and killed them. So no, there isn't any coursing in Afghanistan. Now, of course, we don't have persecution like that, but anyone looking at the UK from afar would see that we do have state-sponsored cultural repression of the rural minority. They would not have dared impose their cultural imperialism on the Maasai tribesmen of Kenya, who also hunt with hounds, but they've denied the right to hunt to the indigenous peoples of Exmoor and the Cumbrian Fells. The majority opinion in Islington has been allowed to trump majority opinion, not minority opinion, majority opinion, in Tiverton, in Tetbury, in Ludlow, in Melton Mowbray, in Bedale, and in probably a majority of market towns in this country. There is a democratic deficit, which is what human rights legislation is supposed to correct, and which the United Nations, a supranational body, is also keen to correct. How do we fight against persecution? With another P word, philosophy. We've lost our great philosopher, Roger Scruton, very sadly. But Roger left us this. He wrote in his great book on hunting: "If it is true, as I believe, that the fox is better served by hunting than by any other form of cull, and that all rival practices expose him to far more suffering, then it is not just permissible to hunt, but morally right." And now, Nick Fox's excellent book, Hunting Ethics, has backed up that statement with rigorous science that we did not have 2 decades ago. And he and the other hunting kind academics have expanded the philosophical arguments so that we can now also say hunting is so hardwired into our DNA and so indivisible from our culture that no government, however big its majority, should ever be allowed to take the freedom to hunt away from us. All this gives us fresh hope that the arguments have moved on from 2 decades ago, which brings me on to E. E stands for ecology and ecosystems. We now know so much more about it, don't we? And we all agree with George Monbiot, don't we? That wolves should be back in our ecosystem to allow for the natural process of hunting so that trophic cascades can work, creating a landscape of fear for deer and for mesopredators like foxes. It's just that we believe that the wolves should be kept in kennels and only go out on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Saturdays. Most importantly, E stands for enlightenment. It's now becoming very clear to us that we've been living through a counter-enlightenment. Dilys and I were talking about it earlier, how science is swept away by postmodernist ideology. The Enlightenment values of truth and reason and tolerance have been bulldozed out of the way by postmodernist prejudice, identity politics, and wokeism. We are told that women can have penises and men can menstruate. These are not normal times we're living in. And we should portray the ban on hunting in that light as an aberration that has only been around 20 years out of how many thousand millennia, somebody said, and will not be around for very much longer, I pray. The good news is that there is now a backlash and a big wave is building to sweep away the culture wars and reassert the Enlightenment. We see it clearly in America, where the Trump administration is defending free speech and cracking down on cancel culture on university campuses. And in Hollywood, where producers are saying, go woke, go broke. And we see it here with the party leader ahead in the polls being one who never misses a photo opportunity at a Boxing Day meet. And with the cross of St. George being flown everywhere, seemingly as a way of saying that traditional English culture has to be defended. There's also a rural backlash against the family farm tax, the heather burning ban, and countless other things. If only we had a rural alliance capable of channeling all these separate angers into powerful protest. Suddenly, everyone is talking about freedom. Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of protest, freedom of worship, and so on. Should we not be in the vanguard of libertarianism, talking about cultural freedom and a freedom to hunt, instead of arguing about pretendy hunting? Back to hope. Life is grim right now, but it will not always be so. If we were here in 1655, not 2025, we would have thought the situation was completely hopeless. We could not have known that 5 years hence there would be a huge paradigm shift, and I believe the same thing will happen again. Perhaps as early as the next election in 2029. We have to be ready to ride that wave when it comes and make sure we have a surfboard, and thankfully Hunting Kind has been working hard to construct that surfboard. There is hope after all, but we can't just hope that things will turn up like Mr. McCorber. We have to create the conditions for hope to flourish by standing up for what we believe in and demanding that the freedom to hunt be one day restored to us. Don't give up. Never give up.